Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today I'm bringing you guys one of my catch-up album reviews where I talk about some albums that I've heard that were released this year that I didn't have a chance to review when they were initially released for whatever reason. Maybe I just didn't have enough time to review it, maybe it just slipped under my radar, or maybe I didn't even plan on listening to the project initially and I just decided to check it out because I was recommended it, I saw reviews of it that were positive, or something along those lines. So I have three projects that I'm going to be talking about here today. The new albums from PRhyme and Father John Misty, as well as the newest EP from Jimmy Eat World. I'm going to be talking about all three of these here in this video, sharing with you my thoughts. They aren't really going to be as detailed as a normal album review I do here on this channel, just for the sake of time here in this video, but I will try my best to deliver my thoughts on these projects to you in this video. So let's start out with the newest album from PRhyme. This project being a collaboration between rapper Royce da 5'9" and producer DJ Premier. And I did review Royce da 5'9"'s album, Book of Ryan, that was released earlier this year. I'm going to have that review at the end of this video up on screen if you want to check that out. But the short version is that I really liked that album. It's one of my favorites of the year so far. And I did plan on checking out this album before that album, but I just didn't have enough time to get around to it. And I hadn't at that time heard the first PRhyme album even, and that was another project that just slipped under my radar a few years ago. So I didn't really, I was kind of unsure if I should check this one out. Did I have to listen to the first album first to get this one? Not really the case. Not really the case with this one here. But overall, I enjoyed this PRhyme album here. I'm not quite as in love with it as I am with Book of Ryan, but I still think it's a decent project overall. Royce da 5'9" is definitely delivers some good bars here on this project. I think his flows on this thing are great. He just sounds good just here in general as well. And DJ Premier, his production here is easily my favorite part of this entire project. It's just consistently, excellent sounding throughout this thing. And Royce da 5'9" sounds great over this production as well. As far as the subject matter goes on this project, this is probably where this album doesn't really interest me as much. It's just because there's not really all too much, lyrical substance that's super interesting to me here on this project. Of course, there's some bragging on here, which I think Royce da 5'9" definitely has the, skills to pull off, when it comes to bragging and hip-hop. You actually gotta have skills, if you're gonna brag that you're the best, you have to at least, showcase the talent to be one of the best. And I think Royce da 5'9" is one of those rappers. So when he's bragging, I think he manages to do a decent job of it. But there's just not a lot of, depth here that I find myself super interested in or, really wanting to return to for repeated listens. There are some tracks on here that do have a bit of depth to them, like the opening track, Black History, which actually did not originally appear on this project. It appeared on a Royce da 5'9" I forgot if it was a mixtape or an EP, Trust the Shooter. It came out before his album Layers back in 2016, and I liked the track when I first heard it on that project. And on this project, it's probably still my favorite track here, though this version of the track is also slightly different from the version that appeared on that EP or mixtape or whatever it was. But it's not super different. I still really like this song. And one thing I do also really like about this is that it does have some lyrical subject matter that I really like, with Royce kind of going into detail about some things in his own personal life. And if you saw my review of Book of Ryan, you would know that I really like that project because he went into a ton of detail about his personal life on that project. But yeah, that's probably my favorite song on this album. The production is also fantastic, like I said before, and it's also just a great opening to the album. I mean, there is that skit thing that comes before it, but, it's the real opening to the album. It's the first song you get, and, it really hooks your attention and gets you excited for the rest of the project. I also really like a lot of the features that appear on this project. I mean, there are some that are a bit more, lackluster, I guess you could say, aren't quite as memorable. And, but there's still some that are great, too. Like, the Big Crit feature was great. The Rhapsody feature was great. I know she had an album that came out last year that was great that I just didn't have a chance to check out. So many albums slip by me, and it's something that always bothers me to some extent. But, yeah, I gotta live with it. And back to the features, the Yellow Wolf feature was also pretty good, I thought. The features on this thing I just thought were pretty entertaining, and they added some diversity to the project, which is really what good features should be doing. Like I said, at the end of the day, this is a decent project in my opinion. It didn't really wow me, but at the same time, I can't say I didn't enjoy it. It feels a little bit too long at times. The lyrical subject matter isn't, the most interesting to me for the most part. There's even a track on here where, the topic of the song is kind of being born in the wrong generation. I mean, I believe the word I use is like the wrong era. But, change the word era to generation, and it's pretty much, one of those memes that's like born in the wrong generation or something like that, which, didn't exactly rub me the right way, but, it's not like the lyrical subject matter on most of this project is awful or anything either. It's just okay. It just didn't really interest me as much, especially in comparison to Book of Rhyme, which, I can't help but compare this project to some extent, given that both have Royce da 5'9" as a part of them, and both were released very close to each other. But yeah, the production on here is great. Royce da 5'9" himself sounds, good over this production. He's actually flowing pretty good here. And, there are tracks like Black History that are pretty good on here as well, just as, whole tracks. So yeah, if you're a fan of Royce da 5'9", if you're a fan of PRhyme, DJ Premier, I would recommend this album to you because you're probably going to get some enjoyment out of it. Maybe not a ton, you're maybe not going to love it, but you're still going to like it at least. Alright, that sums up my thoughts on that project. Next I'm going to talk about the newest EP from Jimmy Eat World, which is Love Never / Half Heart, which is just really the names of the two songs that comprise this EP. Not a super original name, I guess you could say, but, gets the point across. This is a project that just slipped under my radar, honestly. I'm a Jimmy Eat World fan. I like their music. This just slipped under my radar, and, there's really not much of an excuse for it aside from that. But I did, get to hear this thing, and overall, I like this EP. I think it's pretty solid. I don't think that this is, two of Jimmy Eat World's best tracks or anything like that, but they're two solid cuts that if you like Jimmy Eat World, I think you're gonna like. The first track, Love Never, is probably my favorite of the two. It has a bit more energy to it, but, not that it's like super crazy and off the walls or anything like that. It has that sort of Jimmy Eat World, sadness, I guess you could say, added to it to some extent. That sort of emo-ness, I guess you could say. And, considering I typically like that, and especially when Jimmy Eat World does it, I happen to really enjoy this track. It's very catchy. The guitar parts on here are also great. It's overall just a very solid song in my opinion. I'm not quite sure if I would say it's one of Jimmy Eat World's best songs. I mean, it's not going to be making like my top 10 favorite songs from them or anything quite like that, but it's a solid track. And the second track you get on here, Half Heart, is a bit slower, a bit sadder still, and it's also a pretty solid song in my opinion. I don't like it quite as much as the first one. I don't think it's quite as memorable as the first track that you get on this EP, but I still think that it's a pretty, okay song in its own right. And if you're a Jimmy Eat World fan, I think you're still going to like this track. So yeah, overall this EP, there's not a whole lot to say about it considering it's only 2 tracks long. And, typically reviews I do in this catch-up review format aren't, I don't go into full detail about them, but I can kind of do that with this EP here because it's so short. If I had done an actual review of it, this is probably the length it would have actually been. But yeah, this is just a very solid EP overall. If you're a Jimmy Eat World fan, if you're a fan of the style of music that Jimmy Eat World makes, if you've shown any kind of interest in their music ever, like some singles here or there, I think you'll get some enjoyment out of this EP. And considering how short it is, only 2 tracks, not even 10 minutes long, what's the worst that could happen? You don't really care for it all that much? I definitely would recommend checking it out. No, not a great EP by any means, but a good one. It's a solid project. And moving on to the final project I'm going to be talking about here today, the newest album from Father John Misty, God's Favorite Customer. Now, Father John Misty is a, character that I've heard great things about for the past, I don't know, like three-ish years, I guess you could say at this point. First heard about him in 2015 when the album that he dropped that year was released. That was really the year where I started getting into a lot of reviews on YouTube, music reviews that is, and I heard a lot of great things about that album, but I never got around to checking it out. And then he also had the album released last year that I also heard some good things about, but I also heard some people say that it was kind of, up its own ass to some degree, and that it was, pretty long. So, that kind of turned me off from checking it out. Like, it was on my to-get-to list, but, like, at the very, very bottom, pretty much that part of my get-to list that, is pretty much, I'm just never going to get to it, and I know that, but I still put it there just to feel better about myself. Yeah, it was there. But when I heard that he had this new album out that also had some good reviews behind it, was a lot shorter than his last album, and I didn't really hear it was all that pretentious or anything, I decided, why not check it out? So I eventually did, but I had to wait a bit because June was such a busy month for album releases. But I'm really happy I checked this thing out, because out of the 3 projects we're talking about here today, this is easily my favorite of them. And this album has definitely made me a fan of Father John Misty, at least this album. And I'm definitely curious to go back and listen to his other albums, as well as the other albums that he's released under different names and such. I know that this is, a kind of project that he has going for him. I'm interested to check out his other stuff, basically. This is a pretty great album overall. When I was initially listening through it, like the first couple times or so, I was enjoying it. There wasn't anything really bad to it, but nothing was really like jumping out at me as being super interesting, with the exception of maybe a couple tracks. But I kept at this thing. I kept listening to it, and this thing grew on me a ton, just with repeated listens. And as I was able to really kind of soak in what this album had going for it, because I don't think this is really an album that's just gonna slap you on the face in first listen with the best stuff that this album has to offer. Really, I feel like this is more of a subdued project to some extent. And like I said earlier, I haven't listened to his other projects as of right now. This is the only one I've heard from him, so I can't really compare this to his other projects or anything like that. So I'm sorry if maybe I'm missing some of the subtext that's going on here in this project. But basically what I got from this project was a pretty kind of depressing project that doesn't present itself as being super depressing on the surface. Like, this isn't like a very oppressive darkness like some albums will try to do. This is one that if you just listen to this as like background music, it'll probably sound fine enough to you. But when you really examine the lyrics and what's going on here on this project, it reveals a whole, world, I guess you could say. And I really like a lot of the, just lyrics on this thing and the storytelling that's going on here. The opening track on here, Hang Out at the Gallows, is one of my favorites on the entire album. And it was one of those tracks that, on my initial listens, it still stood out to me, even though much of the rest of the album, took a while more to really click with me. This track has a bit more energy to it, I guess you could say, compared to some of the other songs on here. Not that it's, really crazy or off the walls or anything like that, but it kind of has this sort of, I don't want to necessarily say grand feel to it, but, kind of grand on a more small scale, I guess you could say, if that makes any sense. It feels almost like an anthem of sorts, but like, it's kind of self-aware, and the lyrics are actually really dark. And I kind of like that about this track. It has a very, it's a bit catchy. I like the sort of bigger feel it has going for it. And I think it's just a great, start to this album overall. It's one that definitely, kept me interested in this project for, in repeated listens. And I'm happy that it did really hook me in on this project, because eventually all the other tracks really started to grow on me a bit more. I believe I read somewhere, when doing research about this album, that, Father John Misty himself was writing this album, like, in a hotel by himself. And that's reflected in a lot of the lyrics here, like The Palace, or on Mr. Tillman, where it's kind of this sarcastic sort of song from the perspective of, someone working at the hotel, I guess you could say, where he's staying. And I know that Father John Misty, I've heard at least through reviews of his music and stuff in the past, that he's pretty self-aware on his projects in terms of his lyrics, and just self-aware at times of his own pretentiousness or things like that. And that definitely shows on some tracks on here, like Mr. Tillman, which, as a song on its own, as one of the more upbeat sounding songs on here, I guess you could say. Like I said, if you examine the lyrics a bit more, it doesn't seem so upbeat anymore. But, it has a bit more of a happy mood to it, I guess you could say, if you were just to take the mood of the track on its own. And, it's a fun song overall, but, at the same time, it's kind of not fun, if that makes any sense. Another track on here that I really like is The Songwriter. I really like the lyrics on here, where he's really talking about, he's kind of talking to someone, and he's just kind of asking how would, the song be different if it was from their perspective instead of his own. And this brings, some interesting things to mind, because, whenever you listen to music and you're listening to a story that the artist is telling through their lyrics, you have to remember that you're hearing it from their own perspective, and that what they're saying may not necessarily be what actually happened. And that's something interesting to think about. But this song really brings to light, what would be the case if maybe what, the person this song is talking about had their own perspective in the form of a song or something like that. You really don't get that in music unless the person being talked about is like a musician and maybe they decide to release a track, following it up or something, or responding to the initial track or something like that. Which, isn't super often. I mean, you could definitely find examples of that, but compared to every story out there in the form of music that's just talking about someone else who never had the chance to share their side of the story through music and just never got to be heard, it's a pretty interesting concept. And Father John Misty on this track is really talking to this person and, essentially kind of saying, how would things be different if they were the one talking? Would they be truthful or would they not be truthful? And, it kind of brings to light his own lyrics. Are his own lyrics truthful, or are the things that he talks about in his lyrics, the people he talks about, the situations he talks about, are they necessarily truthful, or are they, maybe a little bit, not necessarily fake, but maybe a little bit exaggerated, something along those lines? And when you consider the fact that his music is oftentimes a bit sarcastic, a bit self-aware, this opens a lot of questions, I guess you could say. And it makes you really think, and I like it when lyrics make me think like that. And I like how it's a message that could extend to lots of different songs and just topics as well, because like I said, this could apply to many different scenarios, not just Father John Misty here on this album talking to whoever he is talking to. The instrumentation on this album is pretty mellow. It's not really aggressive, in your face, anything quite like that, which I guess, I expected considering the type of music Father John Misty makes, and knowing that going into this project. Lots of more laid-back, I guess you could say, guitars, pianos, things of that sort, which I think work nicely with the lyrics here and his delivery. It's kind of subdued, which I guess makes sense given that I feel like this album as a whole is a bit subdued. Like I said, it doesn't really slap you on the first listen, but with repeated listens, it all really just clicks together, I guess you could say. And Father John Misty himself, his voice, his singing, sounds very nice. I think he's got a great voice on here. He's got a great ability to make a catchy chorus when he wants to, even just very memorable verses. Just even after, a couple listens of this album, for some of the tracks when I was reading along to the lyrics or just looking at the lyrics outside of the context of listening to the album, not necessarily listening to the album while reading them, as I was reading through the lyrics, I could just kind of hear, the whole melody and things like that. I was just able to kind of sing along with it in my own head, I guess you could say, which is, pretty cool how easily these songs kind of stuck after a few listens. Like I said, on the first few listens, this thing didn't really stick all that much, but, eventually it was all kind of there for me. It all started to make a lot of sense. I was really able to put all the lyrics together, and then all the instrumentation kind of clicks with that. It's just a very good album overall, I would say. If there's any album I'm talking about here today that I regret not being able to give a full album review to, it's this one, because I feel like there's still so much to dig into with this album. The lyrics on all the tracks here, how they all tie together, the instrumentation, the vocals, it all just sounds very nice on here. And this is definitely a project that I could see myself returning to for repeated listens in the future, just because, like I said, I still feel like there's a lot that I can digest in this project. More lyrics that I could just analyze and look for, more meanings to, and just more things to take out of this thing going forward. And, it easily is one of my favorite albums of the year so far. This is definitely end-year list material here. And like I said, I've never heard any of Father John Misty's other projects before, though I'm definitely interested in checking them out now. But, from the perspective of someone who hadn't heard any of his music before coming into this thing, I liked it overall, and I really like this thing. And maybe if you gave it a listen and you didn't really care for it all that much, I recommend giving it some more listens and definitely paying attention to the lyrics as well, because this is definitely a project where you can't just really turn your brain off, I guess you could say, because you're not going to get the full experience out of that. This is definitely an album that you need to be paying attention to while it's playing. And considering the album isn't super long, it's a little less than 40 minutes in length, it's not like a chore to listen to either. I found myself, even wanting to replay this thing as soon as it was done, given how much I enjoyed it and how short it was. I mean, I know that's not super short by any means. We've got much shorter albums this year, but it still is not a super long project, and I like that overall. I tend to prefer shorter albums to longer ones. So yeah, that is just my own opinion. And, you know, that goes for all three of these projects I talked about here today. Just my own opinion. If you happen to have your own opinion that's different than my own, it's perfectly fine. In fact, feel free to leave it in the comments section down below. I would greatly appreciate seeing that. And while you're down there, make sure you leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more music-related content, album reviews, countdown lists, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, these are definitely projects that, you know, while I like these projects to varying degrees, I still do like all three of these projects here. So if you're looking for some music to listen to enjoy, I think, you know, as long as you like the genres in question, I think you'll enjoy these three projects. Though if I had to recommend any one of these three, you know, it would be the Father John Misty project. That's probably my favorite here. And like I said, year-end list material. But yeah, that's just my own opinion. Feel free to have your own. Thanks for watching, guys, and stay golden.